My name is Maria Kent Beers, and my co-host Rachel Martinez and I are pleased to present Remember Me. This podcast is dedicated to preserving the memories of those diagnosed with FTD. We hope this episode leaves you feeling more connected, provides a deeper understanding, and allows you to learn to accept the good. Always, always accept the good. This is Remember Me.
We're here with Melissa. Melissa, where are you right now? Where are you located?
I live in Beaverton, Oregon.
And Melissa's father, Mark, is the person that we are talking about today. Tell us a little bit about Mark's journey. Like when you first noticed, what did you notice? Kind of like from the very get-go.
Sure. I think that what's hard about FTD is really identifying when it all began, right? When did the father or the husband that you knew start to make that change? There were certainly a lot of really what the heck moments that we had, I would say for the last 10 years in particular, that just felt very off. My parents live in Maui in the islands of Hawaii, and they have been there for 25 years. Given that they live on the Hawaiian Islands, I don't see them as often. It's one of those things where as you get older, we would see each other maybe 2 or 3 times a year. So because of that, I was able to see, I think, as he got closer to his diagnosis, very abrupt and jarring things happening. So I'll kind of start with what the big ones were, and then I can tell you a little bit more about some of the more subtle things that we saw. So my father was diagnosed with FTD, or frontal temporal degeneration, in January of 2018. He also was diagnosed with vascular dementia. Getting that diagnosis was harrowing, painful, and incredibly frustrating, which seems to be a theme for most of us. But leading up to that diagnosis, I would say his birthday, his 70th birthday, he came to visit us in Oregon. I convinced my husband that it would be great to rent a house in Bend, Oregon, which is a beautiful part of Central Oregon, and go have some fun with my dad and my mom. I noticed kind of right away that he was acting a little he was immature. That's the best word I can describe, is he was rather childlike in some of his actions and behaviors. Anyway, I noticed over the course of several days that he was drinking a significant amount and just making kind of odd, uncomfortable comments. And on his actual 70th birthday, we went to a really lovely steakhouse. And I noticed my dad picked up his plate and started licking it. Like, he's like, the sauce is so good. And then just starts licking the plate. And then he starts grabbing our other plates and licking them. And this just felt like, at first we thought, was he trying to be funny? But then it became increasingly not funny. And, between drinking wine and his behavior, I was getting very upset with him. So the whole trip to Bend was really awkward.
Did you ever kind of call him out? Like, Dad, what? Okay. And was it a rational response?
No, he didn't particularly like that I was kind of, I don't want to say scolding him, but he didn't think that it was my place to mention it. In fact, when we came back from Bend to the house, I said, we're not going to drink while they're here for the rest of this trip. But then, of course, my dad, you're not the boss of me, goes out and buys wine and kind of does his own thing. And so I didn't really have control. My kids seemed to be increasingly uncomfortable around Grandpa and the way, or Papa as they call him, and how he was behaving. And so the one thing that happened that literally I think was the biggest trigger for me was the last day of their visit. I had to go into work early. And at that time, my daughter was in junior high and my son was in high school. And I thought that morning, wouldn't it be great if Papa and Tutu, as they call my mom, could drive them to school? They'd have a little more time with them on their final day. And he was like, what time does she need to be at school? And I told them several times, drop Abby off first and then Ben. And he was so consumed with this idea of time that he got in the car probably literally right after I left with the kids And Abby's like, but I can't go inside the school, Papa. And it was raining and it was bad. And he literally just kind of kicked her out and called her a bad name. And then he drove Ben to school and he called him an ungrateful little asshole. Now, I got great kids, and I'm not just saying that for the sake of a mother saying that. They're really great kids. And they were totally shocked that my father would call them those names. And I was shocked because my dad didn't do that. So something was way off. I noticed that my mom in that particular trip was, I don't want to say covering for him, but she definitely was trying to make better of it, right? So when things went off the rails, my mom would gracefully try to recover things. She was very good at that. And I understand why she would. Mm-hmm. But in that instance, when I have my daughter calling me on my work phone and crying hysterically, and my son then texting me, and I'm like, as a mother and protecting them, I'm just like, I'm done. This whole trip was a complete awful disaster. And I was like, Mom, something is wrong with Dad. Maybe he has a brain tumor. That's what I said. I said, I would, if I were you, get him in and get him an MRI. That's all I could think of, is that Dad needs an MRI. We need to get to the bottom of this. And I said, until then, I kind of don't want anything to do with you both. I just need to distance myself because this is damaging and it's hurtful. Mm-hmm. And of course, my mom felt terrible. And my dad kind of resolved, but the point was I could no longer deal with this. And as it pertained to my mom, you know, he had been increasingly agitated and angry at her. And they went to marriage counseling where he was told he was severely depressed. Alcoholism came up on multiple occasions, that my father was just a severe alcoholic. So I have to give my mom a ton of credit because she finally really pushed, and getting in to get those diagnoses is not easy. Mm-hmm. And it finally, she got in because of a potential hearing issue for my father. Mm-hmm. So the doctor was able to get her that MRI based on the fact that he needed to be looked at because he was having potential hearing loss.
So you are basically trudging along this path on your own. You're advocating he needs help. Thank God for the hearing issue, right? Because if it wasn't for that, who knows?
Exactly. I'll share one little bit of story that obviously we can look back and say, oh my gosh, that's FTD. My husband proposed to me. He's my second husband. He wanted to do it at my parents'. And so at dinner, my now husband gets out a box with my name on the top and starts to get on bended knee. It's like obvious in the moment what's about to happen. And my dad grabs his fork and says, Carol, this is a dinner fork. You know, I only like a salad fork. I'm just going to tell you, anybody who's ever had a moment with like the moment you're supposed to remember about your proposal, it isn't listening to your father complain about his utensil. It was so bad. But again, I don't mean to kind of throw all these stories out, but this is how FTD looks. We didn't have a diagnosis until January of 2018. Finding specialists who know something about this is impossible. And just because there are people who are neurologists doesn't mean that they understand this disease. The one woman who finally, I wouldn't say diagnosed, but basically called out that there was something going on there, sat in the room with my parents, put the scan of my father's brain up on the screen and the information, and walked out on my mom. And of course, nobody called the family. No one asked to interview all of us and say, tell us about your father. What was he like 10 years ago? What was he like 5 years ago? What was he like a year ago? Nothing. And so it's all very scripted. It's all very clinical, but it's missing that very important piece of the human. Who are they? Who were they? Who are they now? And so when you have my mom saying something is wrong with my husband, it wasn't until she could see on his scans the deterioration of his frontal and temporal lobes, and then the vascular dementia, that all of a sudden things came together. That was in July. So March happened. By July, my mom had gotten some information, but not a diagnosis. And then she was told that really she needed to go to Oahu to get a diagnosis. And of course, with the availability of people who specialize, that meant that really she wasn't going to get in until closer to November or December to have any additional information. In the meantime, my father ended up in jail 6 times in 3 months for a variety of infractions, evading an officer, drunken driving, stealing, some domestic issues that eventually landed him with a restraining order. I'll just stop with that for a second and tell you that my father spent Christmas in jail of 2017. And as painful as that was for our family, it provided my mom a few days respite from a very unbelievably bad experience. So
would she confide in you, or did she still kind of keep it separate?
By then we were talking. She sent me a card. I wouldn't say it was an apology card, because realistically she had nothing to apologize for. She didn't know what was going on with her husband. And yet she sent me a card and sent me the papers then, that gave me an indication that this was truly a medical situation, and that we didn't know what it was yet, but all signs led towards degeneration of his brain. And so I was operating from where I live in Beaverton, Oregon, and trying to save my father and save my mom. So case in point, my mom with this restraining order was out one evening doing grocery shopping, or she wasn't home. And I got a call from my father, whom I thought was in jail. And I'm like, Dad, what's going on? And he's like, I'm at home, but I can't get in. Okay, well, Dad, you're not supposed to be at the house. There's a restraining order. And of course, I didn't know what he didn't understand or understood. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, Dad, you can't be there right now. And he had gotten himself out. And he's like, well, I'm home and I need to get in the house. And I said, well, Dad, if you go in, they're going to come and take you. Please don't think that I think that my father's an abuser. They've been married almost 52 years. They're a loving couple with all the regular stuff.
We know. Trust us. We know.
The disease does this.
Right.
Yeah. And so I had to get really quick. And he somehow had, probably taken a cab there. So then I said, Dad, wait here. So then I called my mom and kept him busy, called her and said, Mom, don't go home. Go to a friend's house, but don't go to the house. Dad is there. And then while she was there, I said, let me figure this out. I ended up calling a cab company. And my thought was I would reserve a room at a local hotel. And then I would have the cab driver transfer my father. And then my dad would just stay there until things had settled over and that the restraining order was over. Because I think there was another day or two on that. So I thought that was a great idea, right? Me working in, how do I solve for this and keep everybody safe?
I have anxiety right now. I have anxiety right now listening to you tell this story and being not anywhere near your parents and trying to coordinate this disaster.
Well, and protecting them both in a sense, right? Like you don't want your dad to get hurt. Something's going on, and you also don't want your mom to get hurt. If it's even, who do you Mom, I want to save you, Dad. That's
right. But I'm goosebumping because I'll never forget this. So I thought that this plan would work. And so then I had to get the cab driver, who I finally got her there. And I was on the phone with her. And she says, I see your dad. I see him. And I'm like, great. Get him in the car. And she all of a sudden starts screaming and said, no, I'm not taking him. I'm leaving. I come to find out that as my father was approaching her cab, he fell on his face and face planted, and then was bleeding profusely. And this woman, rightfully so, decided that that wasn't a fare she was going to pick up, and she left. And then it got weirder. And somehow I had also called my sister at the time, and her boyfriend had picked him up to take him to the hospital. So then they finally got there, loaded him in the car. She texted me a picture of my father. He's got blood down the side of his head. I am literally a mess. What is going on? And he had several instances of having to go to the hospital. My dad was a frequent flyer when it came to the emergency room. And of course, on this particular occasion, he fought them. And then eventually my sister took him to the hotel that I had reserved the room. And that's when I'm like, what am I doing now? What now do I need to do? So then I did a social services intake because he was a risk to himself. And I had to do something. My father now all of a sudden had to deal with medical care, social services, law enforcement, psychiatric care, and yet everyone just kind of passed him along. So by the time social services and the social worker and her advisor or her supervisor showed up at the hotel that morning, she called me before they went in. And then she's like, I'm going to go check on your dad. And then she called me with him on speaker and said, I have Mark here, and Mark would like to talk to you. And we are feeling like we've got a great plan, Melissa. And I'm like, She goes, Mark, talk to Melissa about what you're going to do. And he says, well, I'm fine, but I'm going to get help for drinking. And so the social worker is like, see? Everything's fine. We're going to get your dad in, and he's promised to get help for his drinking problem. And I said, no, that's not what we're going to do. That's not what we're experiencing here. And long story short, my mom eventually got that social worker to understand what was going on with my father. And she became a major advocate in helping my mom get guardianship of my father, which was another massive undertaking in order to save himself from himself. But I go back to this idea that when seconds count, nobody wants to hear from you. My father has frontal temporal degeneration. You're a police officer who's showing up at the scene of my parents' house, and I'm the one who called you, and I'm trying to explain to them what this disease is. It puts him at risk. It puts her at risk. It puts everybody at risk. When he goes to jail several times, you keep releasing him. You aren't dealing with what is going on. Social workers, nobody knows about this disease. So first responders are on my hot list of people to get involved and educate. And it is my passion play to see things improve. But I'll just say that in this situation where nobody knows what this is, they don't have the resources. They don't have the tools. They don't even have the capacity to understand that not all dementias are memory. Not all dementias are old people. My father looked fit and well back in 2018. I mean, you would not look at him and think this is somebody whose brain's atrophying. Right. And honestly, you know, to have to go through all of this in order to get help is unbelievably bad. But, you know, after all this, they still hadn't gone to to Oahu to get my dad his care. And even after we had a diagnosis for my father, which he got there, things did not improve. The doctor believed he had PPA, primary progressive aphasia. He didn't have that. It was behavioral variant. And again, it was like he was the only doctor in town who had any indicator, but he still wasn't accurate. What finally just kind of really got bad is to get the guardianship, you have to have your physician sign off. My dad, with his compulsion, was walking miles a day. He fell on one of these occasions and came home, and mom called me and said, your dad's leg is very swollen. And I said, take him to the emergency room. She's like, well, he says he's fine. She says he says it doesn't hurt. Right. Well, finally, they got him into the doctor, and the doctor with all the staff had to force him down because his leg was broken. He didn't believe that his leg was broken. And, you know, again, I know this is part of the disease. Right. He did not believe it, and he refused to cast it. He said, you can put a boot on me, I will take it off. He never wore anything to protect it. Then all of a sudden, my mom's doctor's like, wow, something's really bad. And she signed off. But I can't believe that we had to go to that point. And I was trying to get him off the island. For some reason, I thought maybe if we got him off the island, it would be better. Although I couldn't figure out a plan to bring him stateside. Because a lot of people are like, well, bring him to the mainland, get him off the islands. It's not that easy.
Right.
You can't just do that. And there's no place to take him.
Exactly. He comes here and
where
then
am I? Right. So things got particularly bad last fall. My mom, I came to visit and I could see that her health was declining.
Right.
So finally, my mom, and I got to give her all the credit, worked so hard to find a place because there are no places on the island. There aren't really that many places elsewhere.
Right.
For 2018 in January, he got the diagnosis.
And they weren't like, so we're going to set him up with.
Here's the plan.
Right.
Step 1, step 2. No, you have a diagnosis. That's all you have.
Yeah. Good luck.
And as things were going off the rails, I realized really quickly that the neurologist that diagnosed him wasn't going to be his care provider moving forward. That's not their job. So he was fine to give him here's what's wrong with you, but that was it. But I didn't know where else to go. And they kind of just shut me off. Mm-hmm. And eventually we realized that medications were going to be necessary as long as we could keep him away from alcohol. By then we also removed the car from him so he wasn't able to drive. That wasn't
Let me ask you something here too.
Yeah.
Was he still speaking?
Oh, yeah, no problems.
Okay. When you would say, you can't, drink, what? Yeah. Like it's not even.
Yeah. No, he didn't believe anything was wrong with him. And that's that word I can't pronounce well. Ignacia. My father had no idea that this was wrong. This past February, I flew over, took leave of absence from my job, and was going to help my mom with placement. She had done all of the work, and despite my major concern that these people would have no idea at the care home of what was really going on with my father because he was 72 and in healthy and fit and ambulatory and all of the things that make him a danger, and especially an escape artist, we really didn't have a lot of confidence, but we had no other choice. The cost of this, I'll just jump to the cost. $12,000 out of pocket a month.
Just for his housing.
Yep. And care. $12,000. I hate to say this is probably the saddest story because of where we're at today. I went over, I got his room ready, I put up pictures, I got the space to look lovely, and we took him over there, and he couldn't be reasoned with, and he didn't understand. And he started packing up his things that he saw around the room that were his and putting them in a box and saying, well, I'm not staying here. You can stay here if you think we need to stay here. And I started with trying to rationalize with my dad, the dad I knew, the dad who always had all the answers, the dad who always told, words of wisdom. And here I am now in the mirror of him trying to convince him that this is really for his best and for mom's best and that we love him, and it was going nowhere. So we did a diversion and went to a little area, and I did puzzles with him. And we had been told it would be best to let him stay there and go away and stay away for a while to try to help him acclimate and adjust. Mm-hmm. So as my dad was being showed the dining room, the gal in charge there tapped me on the shoulder, and she's like, get out of here now, please. You need to leave. And she said nicely. And I went, now? She's like, yeah, you can't, there's no goodbye. You can't say goodbye to your dad. So I literally went through the 2 gated systems and darted out to the parking lot where I waited for my mom, who then after a couple minutes when they were diverting my dad again, then my mom left. So this happened in February. That's the last time I saw my dad. It's the last time my mom saw my dad.
Because of COVID, right?
Because of COVID. 3 days after my father was there, I really was focusing on my mom, and a dear friend of mine had gifted us a resort stay for 2 nights at a luxury resort so that I could help give my mom the care after years of her not getting care. And she was going to go down that morning. First morning we were there at the resort and do yoga on the lawn by the ocean, and I'd go for a run, and then we were going to start this little healing thing. And I came back from my run and my phone rang, and it was my mom's phone. And all of a sudden, the person that picked up the phone said, "We're down here at the lawn with your mom, and we think she's broken something, and we need you to come down." My mom was not doing as well as she thought she was, and was doing a simple pose and tipped over. And later, when she had her emergency hip surgery, we found out that she had broken off the top of her femur. And as a result of that, my mom was transported immediately to the hospital, where she was there for almost 2 weeks. And then she was put in the partner care home for rehab to my father. So now I had a dad in a care home who had gotten away on 2 occasions. It was devastating. And I realize now that the caregiver really has a hard time. I mean, I may distance caregive, but I wasn't doing what my mom was doing every single day. And then I had to leave to come back to the mainland, and I started to fall apart and even had a terrible case of stress hives all over my body that took off at about this time. But I got back on that plane right as COVID-19 was hitting, and I work in healthcare as a communication strategist. And so my whole life and job from the moment I left became everything related to pandemic communications, and it has been since. But as maybe some people know, the islands are locked down pretty much. You would have to quarantine, self-isolate for 14 days to go there. And the day that I left the islands and saw my mom for the final time at the care home, they were just setting up a tent at the perimeter where you would have to be screened and get your temperature. So my mom, this October, will have been married to my dad 52 years, and yet she hasn't had any contact with him. They've done some parades, but as my mom will tell you, driving by with a cardboard sign and waving at your loved one is not the same as being with them. And I suffer from incredible guilt and constant frustration that I can't do anything really right now. And I know that the people in these homes are struggling. The people who are caring for them are struggling. My mother is struggling. She misses him terribly. I miss him terribly. And there's nothing I can do to change the course of events. All I have is dashing out to the car, not a goodbye, not an I love you. I certainly told him as often as I could. And I've had a conversation with him since he's been in, but he just says he wants to go home. And it's really hard hearing your dad tell you, I just want to go home, and you can't take him home.
I know. Yeah.
So that's where we're at today. And, we're talking about several years, but there were so many points on that little spectrum of strange things that were happening for at least 10 years, maybe a little more.
You're an incredible daughter. I don't know if anybody has told you that lately, but I'd like you to know.
Yeah.
You're an amazing daughter, and you should not have any guilt. I know it happens. I get it, and we're hard on ourselves, but you should not have any guilt. You've done everything. You've long distance caregive. I can't even imagine what that's like. It's such a gut-wrenching story. I cannot believe that on top of everything that you've been going through, now you want to do your part to spread the word.
Yeah. It's not how I want my dad to be remembered, and it is certainly not how I wanted his final days, because none of us know the number of days we have on this earth, but this is definitely, for both my mom and my father, this is not how I saw it going down.
Right.
I know.
Well, I think there's such a level in this story of trauma. It's almost like the trauma has been normal for you for so long. You're waiting for your mom to call. You're waiting for him to try to jump out the window. And now all of a sudden you can't see it anymore. So you're like, what feels normal? Where do I belong now? I can't help. I can't touch him. I can't tell him it's gonna be okay. But
trauma is the right word. And I will say, anybody who's dealing with this is not a disease of an individual. Mm-hmm. This is a disease of the family.
100%.
And you need help. Mm-hmm. I started losing my hair and the hives and during all of this, and I started getting therapy. We realized that I am suffering from ambiguous grief. I am experiencing trauma. And I have obviously, like my mom, gone through something, her much more so. I can't even tell you the hero she is to me. She has surpassed anything that any one individual should ever have to endure in their life. And her love and her faith and her perseverance is outstanding. I couldn't be half the woman my mom is. She's amazing.
You know, you've been talking a lot about the pain that everyone in the family goes through.
Yeah.
And it reminded me that I went in with my dad for the first visit at MGH. It's an incredible hospital here in Boston. We sat with the head doctor, Brad Dickerson. I just remember I was like hyperventilating. I was crying so hard. And I just, is she going to be in any pain? Like, is she going to feel pain? Mm-hmm. And he said, no, but you guys are going to feel an incredible amount of pain. You guys are the ones who are going to suffer. Yep. It's the truth. And I'd like to take it on myself so my mom doesn't feel it. I don't know that she understands.
I totally get that. I'm the oldest, and also that's been my nature. I'm one of those people who just grabs onto things that need care and fixing. I want to help.
My hand. That's me. Oldest too.
Hello, fixer. And I'm going to make this right. And I think, suffering with my deep sadness and sorrow, and at the same time trying to maintain a relationship with my husband and my children. And, if you have kids, you got to still get up and
you got to pull it together.
You got to pull it together. And there are days when you just like, I can't do this. And some of those situations were just over the top, and yet you just move on. It became a little bit comical, and I don't want to say it was always dark, because if you don't laugh, you'll just cry.
You have to.
Yeah.
You have to.
You're laughing. We used to play this like, guess what? Kind of like, you wouldn't believe what Dad did. I'm like, ooh, where were you? And then we would try to guess about what he had done, ran away from her or stolen something or jumped out of the car. But, we would almost, it was like once you got through it and you had lived a very traumatic, he jumped out of my mom's moving car because she refused to take him to the store so he could steal. Banned from Costco for life.
I'd be devastated. That's my favorite place.
I know, and my dad's too.
But I really want to pivot to talking about your wonderful dad, Mark.
Yes.
Before the illness.
Before he was
before the disease.
Before this disease.
Before the disease, before jail, before drinking wine in Costco, which I kind of respect that, but anyway.
Right? Don't we all wish we could have a day where we could have a bottle and drink it in the aisle? I think he probably fulfilled what we all feel at some point.
Right. Totally. So let's start with where he's from, where he grew up.
Yes. So my dad was born in Portland, Oregon. So was my mom. And they met after high school in their early 20s. And my father was an apprentice and eventually became a steam fitter. So he was a mechanical person, and he worked on heating and cooling systems in some of the biggest and well-known buildings in Oregon. He worked a lot on hospitals and high rises and schools. In fact, when I was little, my first fondest memories of my dad were in his work truck driving to Eastern Oregon for work trips. Mom would let me go and be his job kid, and I'd put my tricycle in the back of his work van, and we would go to job sites. This was long before there was any kind of safety rules about 4-year-olds on job sites.
Right.
But my dad, I grew up as a job kid, and so I have a lot of fond memories. My father was a builder. He was just a master builder, and in fact, he ended up owning his own very successful custom home building business up in Port Ludlow, Washington on the Olympic Peninsula. But to get there, he had been a steam fitter. His hobbies when I was born was race car driving. He was very mechanical. And that stopped when he had an accident. And Mom's like, yeah, you got a kid, so we're not going to do that anymore. And he agreed. Back in 1970s, he went to Hawaii, early 70s, and he fell in love with the islands. And he fell in love with sailing when he went out on the Trilogy. And so he came back to Portland, and he and my mom decided to teach themselves how to sail. And in the 1970s, 75 or 76, I can't remember exactly, he bought his first sailboat, a 30-foot sailboat, and he learned to sail it on the Columbia River. And we did that every single weekend for 4 years, and he loved his boat. And so he worked in his trade, but his passion was in his sailboat. They decided at some point in time to go up to the Olympic Peninsula and the Puget Sound, and he and my mom took celestial navigation classes, wrote their wills, got life kind of like survival suits and equipment, and they went 100 miles offshore out of the mouth of the Columbia and sailed up the Washington coast to reposition the boat, where then my dad eventually quit his job in 1980 and said his passion was to sail and to live the life he wanted. And my mom was in agreement and supported him. And so we all moved on to our 30-foot boat when I was 12 years old. Yep. And
wow.
Yeah. And this is the brilliance of my father. And this is the sort of thing that I would say is who he was. He was always good at building. And we lived on our sailboat, and the marina store had a laundromat in the back where Mom would do our wash. And then we had a storage unit where every week we could go out and pick a couple new outfits out on Sundays and bring different books and things down to put on our boat. Believe me, I feel that has trained me up to be who I am today based on those experiences. So I have no regrets. I think they were it was fascinating to grow up in my home. And so Mom would be up there in the marina doing wash, and this marina is in a resort, and these women would come off of these mega yachts. They were CEO wives, and they were in the harbor for the weekend, and Mom would start to talk to them. And eventually she got my dad a remodeling job that way, his first big job. And word got out that my dad was good at this. And so he started his own construction company that way, with my mom basically as business manager and marketing person. And at the same time, he bought some property. But we lived in the house and built it at the same time. So basically it was as we could afford materials. And the way he learned to build our house, he had the plans, is he would drive into town to the library and, for example, would need to know how to go about building a foundation. And he would read books on it. This is all before the time of the internet, right? And he would read books, and then he told me he would go home, he would dream or think about, as he laid in bed, the actual act of doing the foundation build. And then he would then the next day order his materials from the building yard and drive or have them delivered, and he would do that part. I still remember when we could walk through the walls, and when we finally got no subfloor, what a big deal it was. But it was a beautiful home. And by then, my father was the premier builder in this community. My dad believed in a strong work ethic. He worked harder than anyone I know. And my mom was the social front person. And she charmed people, and she still does. You know, my mom is like, oh, Carol, she's amazing. That's my mom's name. I can't believe I haven't said that yet. And in particular, I remember, you know, growing up, that I wanted a job. I wanted to make money, and I wasn't old enough. He's like, well, you can come to work with me. Now, obviously, we all worked on building the house. I grew up in helping, but I remember he's like, we're leaving at 5 a.m. to go to the job site, because he always wanted to show up before his workers. He never was, even when he's successful, he looked like he had not a nickel to his name, and he loved to go places that were nice and show up looking like he had no business being there. You know what I mean? Like, and my dad worked harder than anyone I know. And so at some point they had a building, and their building burnt down in a fire. And they had already bought some property on Maui, and we had gone to Maui a lot growing up. That was his thing, is he worked hard, and then we would spend a month or two on the islands, and it's just where he belonged, is where he loved to be. And so 25 years ago, my parents made the full jump to the island. He cared a great deal about family and time with us, and infused everything that he did with us. He wasn't out there socializing with, you know, they weren't lavish. They were just, they mattered, family mattered. So, you know, I thought that I had a great adult, you know, young life and adult life, and I couldn't have had it any better. I just couldn't have. And
sounds amazing.
That's how I want to remember him.
That's so sweet.
He sounds like an incredibly hardworking man, and just an amazing dad that instilled all of those beautiful qualities into you.
And sensitive and loving, and was a heartfelt person. He would cry. He wasn't a hard person. And even in where he's at now, there's some things this damn disease can't take away. And one of them is that deep who they are. And my dad's caring for people and love, and genuinely in touch with his emotions, that's still there. Even if all these other things happen, that's why I would always say to my husband, this isn't my dad. Because my dad cared a great deal about us and always was there. And, you know, he'd always say, Melissa, when he helped me when I moved into the first home I bought, he's like, you keep those projects, so when I come and visit you next time, I will do those with you. And it was always my job to clean up. He said, I build, I don't clean up. And so
smart guy.
So he'd do whatever you wanted to fix it or build it for you, but you were going to be left with a mess. But yeah, I learned a lot that way. I have amazing admiration, and I celebrate the things that I know are my own strengths because of him. I mean, yeah.
Well, it sounds like you and your parents have just the way that you speak about them, you know, I know, hearing it, how you feel about your dad and your mom. I think that you hold them in high esteem, and that's important. If he could tell you, I want to be remembered as, what do you think? Fill in the blank. What would he want to be remembered as?
First and foremost, a man of faith. Someone who deeply loves God. Second would be his family. That his legacy that he left behind was one of making the world better because of what he did and gave to us. And so I think those would be important. I also think he'd want me to know that I shouldn't be so, I need to remember to celebrate and enjoy this adventure. And he worked hard, but he equally played hard. And he loved travel. He went all over the globe. He loved adventure, race car driving, sailing. He built things out of his imagination. I think he would want to be known as an adventurer. even as I look at myself, and now when I'm getting in my whatever years, I don't even know what you call them anymore. As I approach 50,
the fun
years, yes, my fun 50s, I start to see how his example is playing out in my decisions, because I will tell you that the gift that he's giving me right now is to recognize there is no time to waste. You tell people how you feel, you share, you listen, you do what you want, and you get out there. There's not a tomorrow to be guaranteed us. And I'm, I could say, yeah, I'm worried about getting this dementia, and maybe I will, but in the meantime, I'm going to live fully, and I'm going to live passionately, and I am not going to waste what I have, because that is a gift. And he made sure that we knew growing up that our lives could be what we wanted them to be, and there was no only barriers or boundaries were based on things that we told ourselves. My dad made sure that I understood that, and I still to this day see myself too as an adventurer and a spirit of, I have a lot of discipline, but I also will not hold back from doing the things that I know I like to do and I want to do, because he taught me that.
Well, I think we definitely want to make sure we get some of Mark's past
words,
and we want to hear what he has to say through you.
Yeah. Okay. So I have to set it up a bit. So I spent my junior year of high school living in Japan as an exchange student. And I went on my 16th eve of my 16th birthday. I did not speak a lick of Japanese. And the school decided.
Sorry, do I hear Mark? Because that sounds like an adventure.
What?
Okay. Like,
there may be an apple in the tree somewhere in my story. And the school, in its infinite wisdom, decided that the best way to, and it was an all-girls mission school, decided that really speaking English to me was probably a bad idea, so we should just start talking to her in Japanese. And I look back and think, what? And yet I did become fluent, at least conversationally, and I love Japan with all my heart. But, so this story is a letter that my dad wrote me when I was going through a particularly hard time. I had arrived in September of 1986, and it was February of 87. And it was almost, I'd been there for, 5 months. So I was getting confident in my skills, but I was starting to feel the hard press of learning what it's like to live there. And I had gone through the holidays, and I was missing my family. And there was one particular teacher who was in charge of me who was a jerk. And you know what? It's an international situation. Jerks are everywhere. So,
right.
So my dad wrote me this letter trying to encourage me. And you have to bear with me because my dad's handwriting is beautiful but very hard to read. Dear Melissa, 1 month from today, Mom will be on her way over to see you. She is really looking forward to seeing you as you are to seeing her, I bet. She's a little nervous about going on the plane by herself, but she will forget about that as soon as the plane leaves the ground. Oh, it's so hard to read. We upgraded her ticket so she will be in business class, which is almost like first class. She will be seated on the upper level in the lounge. Melissa, live one day at a time, and don't let Mr. Sato ruin your stay in Japan. It sounds like everyone else that you are associated with is very nice. Enjoy them. And when Mr. Sato talks to you, just think to yourself, and that was underlined, what a miserable SOB he must be
I love it.
To be like that to you. When you are through with your school year and I'm over there to pick you up, I will talk to the principal to establish some ground rules for future American students attending their school if you and Mom think that might help. I think you would agree that it should wait until your year is up but Mom will give you any help you want when she is there. I'm busy building the Port Ludlow Village. The store is going to open sometime in March. I enjoyed your letter you sent to me the other day. We are behind you 100%, Melissa. All my love, Dad. My dad and my mom have always been behind me 100%, and that's why I'm behind them 100%.
Brightness in my life, how sacred and how rare.
Special thank you to Melissa for bravely sharing her story with us. We release new episodes each week on Mondays. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you want to connect with us, you can follow us on Instagram at Remember Me Podcast. We also have a Facebook group called Remember Me Podcast. And if you'd like to donate to the Association for FTD, you can do so on our Classy page, give.classy.org/remembermepodcast. This podcast is produced by Maria Kent Beers and Rachel Martinez, and the beautiful music you hear is by Bailey Kent.
So